Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to have some really good topics coming forth. However, I am a little under the weather, so I just need you guys to bear with me. I got my tea, so I'm good with that. My sister-in-law, she got me this cup. I really love it. And shout out to Teresa. I also have my pomegranates and my oranges. So I'm trying to keep myself together because I really want to get through this video. One of the things that I've been stewing over the last few weeks is, why is God referred to as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? So I had to go and really just dive into Abraham's story, Isaac's story, and Jacob's story separately. I don't have time to get into all their stories, and I encourage you guys to just go and read them. Just a few things that I gathered from reasons as to kind of satisfy my own curiosity as to why God would choose to be the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Perhaps when it comes to Abraham, it was because of his obedience to sacrificing his son when God told him to. And maybe in some way that touched the heart of God because it showed Abraham's faithfulness and his love and devotion towards God. We would see why it touched the heart of God so much, and reasons that would be later revealed when we see how God gives his only son as a living sacrifice to die for the sins of the people in the world. I think that that was very interesting. Perhaps also it was because of the way God told Abraham to leave his home country and go to a foreign place, and he didn't know what was going to be in store for him when he got to that place. But God gave him a promise that he would make his descendants as numerous as the stars. And Abraham trusted God and did what he told him to do. When it came to Isaac, maybe he chose Isaac because Isaac was the representation of the faith his parents had to do the impossible. They were very elderly, I think, like between 90 and 100 years old, and still being promised this son. Isaac was the representation of that promise coming true with that covenant that God made with Abraham. When you consider Isaac wasn't Abraham's only son, he had Ishmael, but he had Ishmael under the circumstances of faithlessness. Him and Sarah kind of conspired for Abraham to go sleep with, one of the servant girls to have a baby with her, because they were still waiting on this promise and they tried to take matters into their own hands. Isaac was the child that was conceived under impossible, fateful circumstances. Perhaps he chose Jacob over his eldest brother Esau, because traditionally the eldest brother was the one that would get the blessing. It could be because of the women in which Jacob married versus the women in which Esau married, and how God wanted to continue that lineage and keep it in the family. It's all these thoughts that are going through my mind as to why God chose Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So essentially, God chose these three generations to bring a lineage of people through them, where there was going to be a birth of the Messiah through the Jews. Well, Romans chapter 3, verses 1 says, "Then what's the advantage of being a Jew? Is there any value in the ceremony of circumcision?" And then verse 2 says, yes, there are great benefits. First of all, the Jews were entrusted with the whole revelation of God. Psalms chapter 135, verses 6 says, "The Lord does whatever pleases him throughout all heaven and earth, and on the seas and in their depths." Then, you can conclude that answer to that question right there. I mean, the Lord does what he wants. Whatever pleases him, he did it because it pleased him to do so. The point is to try to conclude how we get to this idea of the 12 tribes of Israel. The tribe of Judah, out of this tribe, we have Jesus Christ, who comes to save the world. And so that's why it's so important to understand how we get to Jesus. Let's talk about Abraham. Abraham, God told him, "You will be the father of many nations." His original name was Abram. That meant exalted father. But God renamed him Abraham, which means father of a multitude. All right, let's go to Genesis chapter 17, verses 1. I'm just going to start there. When Abraham was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, "I am El Shaddai, God Almighty. Serve me faithfully, live a blameless life, and I will make a covenant with you, by which I will guarantee to give you countless descendants. At this time, Abram fell down on the ground, and then God said to him, This is my covenant with you. I will make you the father of a multitude of nations. What's more, I am changing your name. It will no longer be Abram. Instead, you will be called Abraham, for you will be the father of many nations. I will make you extremely fruitful. Your descendants will become many nations, and kings will be among them. I will confirm my covenant with you and your descendants after you from generation to generation. This is the everlasting covenant. I will always be your God and the God of your descendants after you. I will give the entire land of Canaan, where you now live as a foreigner, to you and your descendants. It will be their possession forever, and I will be their God. Abram, because that was his original name, he was living in, I believe the location was called Haran. He was relocated with instructions from God to go to the land of Canaan, where he lived as a foreigner. And he was obedient in relocating there. And God told him at the age of 99 years old that he's going to make him the father of many nations, which is implying that he's about to have some kids. This is a very faithful move to be obedient and move on this, when the reality of it is it's not realistic that we having kids at 100 years old. You understand? So to trust God and be obedient and faithful and just go where he said he was going to go, holding on to his promise, that is something to pay attention to right there. So now we got Abraham and his wife Sarah. They give birth to their son Isaac. God promised Sarah that she will be the mother of all nations, and she gave birth to Isaac at the age of 90. So she was a little bit younger than Abraham. However, I mean, come on, she's still 90 years old having her first baby. Isaac's name actually means in Hebrew, he will laugh, or he laughs. It's because Abraham laughed at the idea he would become a father at the age of 100, and Sarah having a baby at 90. Sarah laughed also. So in Genesis chapter 21, verses 6, it says, And Sarah declared, God has brought me laughter. All who hear about this will laugh with me. Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse a baby? Yet I have given Abraham a son in his old age. So that's funny. So it does make you smile and it does make you laugh, because when you think about a 90-year-old lady breastfeeding a little infant that's her own child, it's like, wow, God can really do the impossible. So fast forward, Isaac grows up and he marries Rebecca, and he gave birth to a set of twins, Jacob and Esau. Now, Rebecca says that they fought inside of her. It felt like they were fighting inside of her womb, because she did have a very tough pregnancy that she explains in the scriptures. So she did turn to God and she asked him why. Like, why are these kids feeling like they're fighting inside of me while I'm pregnant? Why is my pregnancy so rough on my body? We can see God responding to her. Okay, Genesis chapter 25, verses 22. Let's start there. But the two children struggled with each other in her womb. So she went to ask the Lord about it. Why is this happening to me? She asked. And the Lord told her, The sons in your womb will become two nations. From the very beginning, the two nations will be rivals. One nation will be stronger than the other, and your older son will serve your younger son. And when the time came to give birth, Rebecca discovered that she did indeed have twins. The first one was very red at birth and covered with thick hair like a fur coat. So they named him Esau. Then the other twin was born with his hand grasping Esau's heel. So they named him Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when the twins were born. If we notice, Esau was born first, but after he came out, Jacob was born grabbing the heel of Esau. They named Esau because he was hairy, and they named Jacob because it means grabber. True to his name, when Jacob grows up, it becomes somewhat a cheat, and he eventually supplanted his brother's position as heir to his birthright. He conspired with his mother like a little cheater and stole his older brother's blessings. I want to elaborate on so many stories, but I'm trying to stay focused here. So we go to Genesis chapter 32, verses 24. And then we see that Jacob gets in a wrestling match, apparently, all through the night until the break of dawn with a man. And the man that he's wrestling with wasn't winning. So the man struck Jacob's hip and knocked it out of socket. Jacob still got a grip on the man and refused to let him go until he blessed him. So Jacob is wanting this man to bless him. But the man asked Jacob, like, what's your name? And Jacob replied and said, my name is Jacob. And the man said, well, you will now be called Israel, because you have fought with God and with men and have won. So Jacob said, please tell me your name. The man didn't tell him and blessed him there at this place called Peniel. They call it the face of God, which means I have seen God's face, but my life is spared. Because apparently who this man was that Jacob was wrestling with was like the man of God or God in some way. And that is why he was renamed at that position from grabber or Jacob to Israel. You know, fun fact, the people of Israel don't eat the sciatic muscle just because of this story right here. So after this wrestling incident, we find Jacob is referred to in scripture sometimes as Jacob and sometimes as Israel, and it's very interchangeable. You'll see there are passages that reference like Jacob and Israel side by side, and then there are passages that speak of both names in a synonymous nature. Like it's literally talking about the individual Jacob, but or Israel, but then you'll see in some context it's like talking about Israel as in the nation of Israel, like the Israelites or, you know, the Jewish people. Throughout Jacob's life, he gets blessed with 12 sons. His 12 sons were called Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. It's from these men and their descendants on forward do we have the tribes being formed under the nation of Israel, which are this chosen group of people that God is going to bring forth the Messiah through. All of these sons relocate to Egypt. It starts to talk about this in Exodus chapter 1. So this is how we have these Israelites come into the territory of Egypt. Because as we can see, these people were like in Canaan originally, because Abraham left his place to go to this foreign place called Canaan. And this is where God chose to make his descendants as numerous as the stars. If you read about why did they relocate to Egypt, you can get more in depth in that if you read about Joseph's story. I talk about Joseph a lot because he's like one of my favorite characters in the Bible. In short, Joseph, he's sold into slavery by his brothers. And when we say his brothers, we talking about all of Jacob's other sons. Slavery took him to, you know, put in prison, to being elevated at the highest place of honor in Egypt next to Pharaoh. And so he's running things in Egypt right now, estranged from his brothers. Eventually they reunite. That's a whole nother story. But there's this famine going on right now. And this is where Joseph is in a position where he's about to save his family and he's about to save this whole nation of people because God used his pain and there was purpose with this whole circumstance. So now we got all the sons and their family located to Egypt after the reunion with their brothers, all this forgiveness, all this healing. The new king comes to the throne in Egypt, and he is not aware of how Joseph saved the whole nation. He's not aware of, you know, how Joseph was favored by the previous Pharaoh. Because mind you, this is all like maybe 400 years after Joseph even died. So this guy is not even in the loop of nothing. He's coming in on his own terms. And he's feeling like they're getting so large in numbers, they might turn on us and become allies with enemy nations. And we might have to be under their submission one day. As we can see, God's promise is coming into fruition where these Israelites are really multiplying. And seriously, Abraham's descendants are starting to become as numerous as the stars. And it's happening right before the new Pharaoh's eyes. And so he says, I got a bright idea. Let's enslave them. That sounds familiar. When the minority starts to become the majority, sometimes people get a little intimidated by those large numbers for some reason. I don't know why that is, but it happens nonetheless. And so the more the Israelites multiplied in Egypt, the more brutal the masters became. Through the tribe of Levi, we have somebody who is born that is about to change the trajectory of this brutality that the Israelites are experiencing in Egypt. Moses, got it. So Moses is now born through the tribe of Levi. So we got these Levites that have this baby. But at the time where Moses is conceived, Pharaoh, he hates these people for some reason. He wants to enslave them. Now he's just this wicked man that's ordering the midwives who help give birth to these babies to kill these little boys. This particular Levi mother, which is Moses's mom, she hid her son in a basket and she put him in the water, like let him float off. Like, God be with my baby. I'm not about to let somebody snatch him out of my hand and kill him. Heck to the nah. So she did what she felt was best. The basket is floating. It shows up at this river where the princess bathes. So now you got this royal princess sees this basket. She opens it up and it's a baby. Well, fast forward, she eventually adopts this little baby. She named him Moses, which means drawn out of water, because obviously he was drawn out of water, right? As Moses grows up and he knows that he's a Hebrew and he knows that he was like adopted by this princess or whatnot, he takes on his royal form. Every once in a while, he goes out and he observes, like, yo, these are my people being treated like this. One day he witnesses how brutal the Egyptian slave masters are being to one of his Hebrew people. So Moses got hot about it and he killed the Egyptian. Eventually, Pharaoh finds out about this and then tries to kill Moses. So Moses flees to this place called Midian. He's out of there. So now you got Moses in this new land called Midian, where he goes and settles because he's like a runaway from his home. He meets this Midian family and eventually marries this lady named Zipporah. They have a baby boy. They named him Gershom. And Gershom means an exiled stranger because the circumstance, they were strangers in this foreign land. So years pass and Moses is creating a life for himself with his family in Midian. Eventually, that very evil king of Egypt died, but the Israelites were still groaning under the burden of slavery. So they eventually begin to cry out for God's help. Now, in Exodus chapter 2, verses 24, it says that God heard their groaning and remembered his covenant promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He looked down on the people of Israel and knew it was time to act. So now God is about to do something about this. He chooses Moses for this mission. So now we see here God coming to Moses in a flaming burning bush and choosing Moses out of all the people in the world to return back to Egypt. And he's going to use Moses with the power of his holy hand to free these people from the Egyptian brutality that's taking place out there. So Moses gets to Egypt. Like, I'm not going to go down that. That's a whole nother video. And you guys probably seen the movie, you read it in the scriptures. So after 2 months after the Israelites left Egypt, they arrived at Mount Sinai. And God tells Moses, give these instructions to the family of Jacob, announce it to all the descendants of Israel. We could read about that in Exodus chapter 19. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians. You know how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you will obey me and keep my covenant, you will be my own special treasure from among all the peoples on the earth. For all the earth belongs to me, and you will be my kingdom of priests, my holy nation. This is the message you must give to the people of Israel. The Lord gives Moses everything that he commands. Moses gives it to the people. The people come in agreement with God that they are going to do everything that the Lord commands because they want to be in this covenant, in this agreement with God. God tells Moses, okay, I'm going to speak to you in front of all these people so they will always trust you. So Moses consecrates the people to prepare them for the presence of God to come and speak to Moses in front of everybody. So when they see this, they would get some type of fear of God and reverence for Moses on a new level that will maybe encourage a higher level of obedience and reverence so that they really take this seriously as they have now entered into covenant. Now, let's talk about covenants real quick. So by definition, covenant is simply an agreement. You have two different types of covenant: conditional covenants, which are based off of conditions, and then you have unconditional covenants where it's not based off of a condition, and no matter what, the covenant is solid, meaning you don't have to do anything for it to happen. It just is what it is. So God makes these two different types of covenants with his people. He's done it contextually throughout scripture. Since the beginning in Genesis, the time of creation with Adam and Eve, they call it the Edenic covenant. And you can read about that in Genesis chapter 3. You got the covenant of Noah. This is what you would call an unconditional covenant. It's where God floods the whole world and he wipes it out. But then he gives a covenant saying that he will no longer destroy the earth by flood. The representation of God's promise was a rainbow. That is really where the sign of the rainbow comes from. It's a representation of God's promise that he will not destroy this world by flood, although the world would say that that rainbow represents something else. That's not true according to scriptures. Abrahamic covenant, which is found in Genesis chapter 12, that we kind of brushed on, where basically God says, hey, leave your own country behind you and your people, go to a land I will guide you to. If you do, I'll cause you to be the father of a great nation, and I'll make your name famous and bless those who bless you. Davidic covenant. There is a throne that is established under King David as an everlasting reign for eternity through the family line of David. We later on see that Jesus is born through that lineage. So we can keep going and going. God is a God of covenant. Some are conditional, some are unconditional. But I want to kind of key in on the covenant that he made with the Israelites, specifically in this time of Moses. And this is going to be a conditional covenant where they have to uphold their part of the terms of this agreement. And if not, then there are going to be curses. And if they do, then there's going to be blessings that they will reap for being obedient. They are saying that they're going to be obedient. And then God furthermore comes down and endorses Moses as their leader with showing the people his presence on this top of Mount Sinai. He comes through with all of this roaring smoke and fire and thunder. Yeah, it gave the fear of God in those people, so they knew it was real. Moses is getting to be in fellowship with God at the top of this mountain in this cloud of smoke, and he stays up there with God for like 40 days and 40 nights. I can imagine the conversations they're having up there. So there's this guy named Aaron that is left in charge while Moses is up there having his 40-day meeting with God. Meanwhile, even though they just got finished accepting a covenant with God, trembled at the fear and sound of the thunder and smoke that they seen. It didn't matter. As soon as they were out of God's presence, here they come asking Aaron, their new leader, hey, Aaron, make us some gods so that they can lead us. We just want to feel led by something. Isn't that funny? Aaron's the leader, but he's like on board with it. Like, all right, everybody give me your gold jewelry. And Aaron goes and he makes a golden calf. He shows it to the people, and the people were so excited and started giving credit to the calf for rescuing them from Egypt. You can't make this stuff up. And Aaron, he's hyped because the people are hyped at the golden calf he built, and they happy, so he happy. So he goes even further and builds an altar and announced that they will have a festival to give sacrifices, offerings, feastings, drinking, indulging in all this pagan revelry. The Lord seen this. The Lord said he's seen how stubborn and rebellious these people are. And so he wanted Moses to leave so that his fierce anger can blaze against them. Well, Moses, of course, pacifies God and begs for mercy on behalf of the people. Why give the Egyptians the satisfaction of wiping them out? Please change your mind. And so on behalf of his people, he wants to intercede. Like, we trying to get their slave mentality together, or just be patient with us just a little while longer. Moses says, remember the covenant with your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. As God had mercy and changed his mind. Moses is like, cool, okay. So he goes down from the mountain out of his meeting with God. He sees the calf with his own eyes, this big golden calf, and everyone dancing around it. He was hot. You know, at this time, he had the tablets with the 10 Commandments on them that God wrote. He breaks the tablets. He burns the golden calf. He threw it in the water and then forced the people to drink the water. And he called for the Levites and he told them God's instructions to draw their sword. Anybody down here indulging in this activity with this golden calf, off with them. 3,000 people died that day. And God actually blessed those Levites after he did that, because this is how serious God takes our obedience to his covenant. Now you got Moses like, God, I know these people are tripping, but please, God, just have mercy and come with us. We want you to lead. God is feeling like, yo, I can't even be in the presence of these people because I'm going to hurt somebody. But he's so loving and so merciful, and his essence is just love. And so what does he do? He comes and he leads the people anyway. As they're traveling to the promised land, God also is trying to warn the people of Israel that, listen, as we're going on the journey into this promised land, don't get caught up in the traditions of worshiping their God. Don't intermarry with them. Don't get caught up in being led astray by their women. Don't get caught up in worshiping their false gods and going into their traditions of what they do, because this is not what I instruct you guys to do as my people. Covenant is marriage. Oh, when I got married, I knew I was coming into covenant with my husband. It was like an agreement that I was making, and it's an agreement of faithfulness. The vows say through sickness and in health, for better or for worse, till death do us part. I can't use what we're going through as an excuse to step out and have an adulterous relationship with somebody else when I'm in a covenant with my husband. And it's funny how he uses this same type of analogy to talk to the people of Israel and say, like, listen, they will try to seduce you into committing adultery to me as your God by worshiping other gods. So this right here lets us know that God looks at idol worship as adultery to him. With all this honor accompanying their heritage, their purpose, and their future, Israel still continued to struggle with idol worship, neglecting to take heed to God's continuous warnings not to compromise with idolaters, and future generations of Israelites lost memory about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who rescued them from Egypt. What were some of the reasons why they would do this? One of the reasons that I noticed the Israelites were attracted to the worship of these gods was because the way the religion involved a ritual prostitution. The Moabite women would invite the Israelite men to come make sacrifices to their gods, and the men would accept their invitation and basically indulge in forbidden sexual immorality. And then let's also just talk about national peer pressure that they were having. Coming around these other nations, they just wanted to conform to what everybody else was doing. They wanted to be like them. They wanted to do what they do. Doesn't that sound familiar? The church want to fit in so much with the world that you see a lot of church participating in pagan and secular activities because they just want to be like the other nations. We want to celebrate the holidays like the other nations. We want to dress up for Halloween like how they dress up for Halloween. We don't want our kids missing out on what they're doing, even though God warned us about these things. Just a trend I want you to see historically with people that are chosen by God, the decisions that they make that go against what God's expectations are of us as his people. We can go to 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 20. They literally said, we want to be like the other nations around us. They made this response in accordance to wanting the king to rule over them instead of just accepting God's leadership as a holy nation. You got God, the God of the universe, wanting to lead you and show you how to live, how to move. He gonna bless you. He gonna make you prosperous. But you so caught up in just seeing what everybody else is doing that God's chosen people throughout history, we've always just wanted to be like the other nations. We want to be led by men. We want to, instead of led by God. And it's so crazy. And when the Israelites are participating in the rituals of these nations, these sacrifices are being made to demons. That's what the scriptures tells us in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 20. Let's read it. What am I trying to say? Am I saying that food offered to idols has some significance or that idols are real gods? No, not at all. I am saying that these sacrifices are offered to demons, not to God. And I don't want you to participate with demons. You cannot drink from the cup of the Lord and from the cup of demons too. You cannot eat at the Lord's table and at the table of demons too. What? Do we dare rouse the Lord's jealousy? Do you think we are stronger than he is? It can't be any clearer. Like when you are indulging in the rituals of the world and it's going against what God's instructions in his covenant instruct us to do, it says that these sacrifices with these traditions of what they're doing are sacrifices to demons, regardless of the favor that they got from being in this honorable position of being ones to be called chosen by God. They didn't want to uphold everything that came along with that territory for some reason. The book of Hosea illustrates adultery as a metaphor in describing Israel's problem with idol worship. It gives you a cycle in that book about idol worship, punishment for doing it, then the restoration, because God comes and restores his people, and then forgives them. And then we go back to the idol worship again, back to the punishments, and then back to the restoration and the restoring of our actions, and then into forgiveness. And then we do it again. And this has been going on for generations and generations and generations. Idols come in different forms. Come on TV right now, they got a show that's called American Idol. When you hear people give homage to their favorite artist or somebody that they admire or are inspired by, idol is a loose term that is thrown around, and not just in the world, but also in the church. Like, this is language among believers that we have conformed to, when God is specifically telling us that this is like the one thing that he is just like really, that he is just a jealous God. He is just not the one for that. Anything that sits like on the throne of your heart is basically what you can consider an idol. Things that you feel like you can't live without: possessions, their success and achievements, their physical pleasures, their sexuality. And then let's talk about it. Some people idolize religion to the point to where it dishonors God. So, I say all this to say, being a chosen people means nothing when there is a lack of obedience taking place. No. When you think about how the scriptures tell us humility brings honor, right? And you think about how it's such an honorable thing to be chosen by God. The God of the universe calls on your name to come do something in the earth that will show his power and his glory through things that he's going to use you as a vessel to do. If led by the flesh, we will start to operate in pride, a sense of pride by being this group of people that are feeling chosen. Pride comes before destruction, but humility comes before honor. When God was reminded or thought about his covenant that he had with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, think about it. The Israelites were at their most humble point in life, being enslaved by a group of Egyptians. And then when we go to the scriptures, Numbers chapter 12, verses 3 tells us something about Moses' character. It says, Moses was very humble, more humble than any other person on earth. Pride leads to other sinful things. It's just going to give birth to essentially putting us in a position where we sever ourselves from the presence of God, because that's what sin does to us, which is essentially going to separate us from God's promises. There are certain blessings that come along with honoring these covenants. There are curses that also come along with disobeying these covenants. Even Moses, the most humble man on the face of the earth, chosen by God, he didn't even make it into the promised land because of disobedience. So no one is safe. No one is off limits from upholding their parts of the covenant. and not experiencing consequences, allowed to operate in a level of pride and not have some type of fall or destruction that is associated with that. Now, I do want to make sure I mention that this is the Old Testament covenant that God had made with the Israelites back then. And testament is another word for covenant, honestly. You can really look at it like Old Covenant and New Covenant. Under the old system, gifts and sacrifices were offered as an atonement to be forgiven for our sins, but these things failed to cleanse the hearts of the people who brought them. For the old system only dealt with certain rituals, with foods to consume, rules for washing themselves, and this and that. But in Hebrew, we can read that it says, now Christ has come with God's new and better way. So essentially, when we get into the New Testament, which is the new covenant that he made with his people, it says Christ came with a new agreement so that all who are invited may come and have forever all the wonders God has promised them. So we'll get into that new covenant later on, but right now we're speaking about the old covenant that God went into agreement with Moses and the people of Israel after freeing them from the land of Egypt. One thing about God is he's faithful. He's always been a God to uphold his part of the covenant. He has never went back on what he said he's going to do. We don't stay obedient and true to what we're supposed to do. I think the real focus is understanding that there's a responsibility in being chosen. And even though that you are chosen by God, doesn't mean that in the blink of an eye, disobedience can't sever you from not being able to experience the promise, because this covenant is a conditional thing. It's not just guaranteed no matter what, and you get to do what you want to do because you are a chosen group of people. No, it is contingent upon you upholding your part of the covenant and being obedient to what God is waiting patiently for us to get it together. We just need to be focused on walking that narrow path and choosing him on a daily basis and making the decisions that we're supposed to make so that we're ready when he comes like a thief in the night. With trusting in God just pretty much means we got to divorce our own level of understanding. Despite what's going on in the world, despite what's going on in the media, he has his promises for his chosen people. They are not forgotten. And he says it in Isaiah 11, there will be a gathering of his people. Hosea chapter 3 verses 4, he says that in the last days his people will tremble in awe of the Lord and his goodness. He's going to gather all his people and he's going to put us back a second time in that promised land. And in Amos chapter 9 verses 15, he says, and they will never be uplifted again. So he is going to reveal who those chosen people are. He is going to never uplift them again after he brings them into the promised land for a second time and a second chance. It's going to be a permanent thing that next time around. So what we need to be concerned with is not revealing the truth of these matters, because these matters are inevitable. God already said it. But what we need to be doing is being in preparation to make sure that this second go round, we are choosing him, instead of it just being a narrative that we are his chosen people and then just going on generations and generation of boasting about it and operating in pride and disobedience. Instead, we need to break that cycle and we need to start operating in submissiveness and in obedience and in humility, which is going to bring honor. And we just need to be loving one another. And God is going to reveal and bring honor to who he has called. We don't need to be worried about all of that.